Hi there, I'm Steve Smith, aka Ardalis, and today I'm going to show you how to start working with data in your first ASP.NET Core application using Entity Framework Core and Visual Studio 2019. Let's get started. To begin, I'll launch Visual Studio Community 2019 and return to the project I created in the previous video. If you're starting from scratch, just create a new ASP.NET Core web application, choose Web Application from the next menu, and create the project using its default options. So far, my application runs and displays some simple content that I add to its pages. It's not limited to static content. We saw in the last section that you can display the current server time on a page pretty easily. But to build a useful application, you usually need some way to store and work with data. I'm a fan of board games and I have more than a few. I can use ASP.NET Core and Entity Framework Core, which you'll also hear referred to as EF Core, to create a way to manage my library of games. To get started, I'm going to create a C# class to represent a game in my application. This is often referred to as a model, as in domain model or data model. For a larger application, this model might go into its own project, but for now I'm going to create a folder, models, and put my class in there. Next, I'll add the new class by just right-clicking and choosing Add Class. We're creating a class that represents a game, so we'll just call it game.cs. Now I need to specify some properties of games that I want to include in my data model. I'll add the following. It's important to include an ID property, as this makes it easy to work with a specific game record in the future. For now, this is a pretty simple class, but it's enough to get us started. Now I'm going to add some pages that will let me manage my library of games. I'll need to create a page to list all of my games, another page that will let me add a new game, and of course pages to let me edit a game, delete a game, or just view its details. That sounds like a lot of work considering I don't even have a database set up yet. Fortunately, Visual Studio makes this really easy to get going. First, I need to decide where I'm going to want these pages to live in my application's navigation. I think it makes sense to have a /games path in my app where the content will be. So I'm going to create a games folder inside of the pages folder where all of my app's Razor pages live. Next, I can right-click on the games folder I just created and select Add New Scaffolded Item. I'll choose the Entity Framework CRUD option at the bottom. CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update, Delete, which describes the set of operations I want to be able to perform on games in my library. Now I'll choose the game class that I just created as the model class that I want to use. I don't have a data context yet, so I'm going to click the plus icon to create one. I'm going to call it AppDBContext. I'll leave the rest of these items as their defaults and click Add. After a few seconds, this will create the AppDBContext file that EF Core uses to manage my data, as well as 5 different Razor pages to perform the different operations that we just discussed. We can look inside the Games folder to see the pages that were created. You can see there are pages for Create, Delete, Details, and Edit, as well as a default page for this folder, index.cshtml, which will show a list of all the games that we've so far added. The scaffolding didn't just add files in the Games folder, it also modified my startup class to include services needed to work with the data. If we look at the Configure Services method inside of Startup, you'll see a new item has been added that will add the DB context and specify that it will use a connection string to connect to a SQL Server database. This connection string was added to our app settings file. So just by using that Add Scaffolded Item wizard, I was able to create 5 different pages in my application, as well as the data context I need to work with it, and it set up the connection string to talk to the database for me. If you just need to support simple CRUD operations on some data, this is a really fast way to get started with your app. Now, one last thing I need to do before everything will work when I run it is make sure that the app has an actual database it can use. I don't want to create it manually, so I'm going to add a bit of code to program.cs to ensure the database is created when I run the app. I'll just paste the code in here. You can find this code in the associated documentation. Most of this code is just for error handling and to let me get access to the EF Core DB context from here before the application is running. The important part of this code is here, where it says context.database.ensure created. Just like it sounds, this will check whether the database used by this application exists, and if it doesn't, it'll create it for me. Now I'm ready to run the app. I don't yet have a link to my games page from the main application navigation, so I need to add /games to the address bar. I now see a games list with no items in it. I can click on Create New to add a game. Let's add one of my favorites, Pandemic. Once I've added it, you can see it appears in the list. I can click on Details to show me an individual record, which in this case doesn't show me a lot more information than the list view. Let's add another game, Risk. Okay. Oops, I spelled that wrong. Let's edit it. That's better. Actually, I just gave my copy to a friend, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it from my library. And it's gone. As you can see, it's pretty easy to get started working with data using EF Core, ASP.NET Core, and Visual Studio Community 2019. That's it for today. In the next video, I'll show you how to expose a web API that will let other applications work with your app. See you soon!